If you love ancient history, then this is the channel for you. History Hit TV. It's like Netflix, but dedicated just to ad-free history documentaries, including a huge library of ancient history content from the 9th Legion to Boudica to the First Britain. Simply check out the details in the description below and make sure you use code Odyssey on sign up.
Somewhere under this grass is a Roman cemetery containing the remains of soldiers from all over the empire who were stationed here in South Shields. We know it's here because Victorian builders found loads of bodies. The fort was in use for 300 years, so the cemetery could be huge. And it's not just full of your average Roman squaddies. There were troops from Spain and Africa. There's even an intriguing reference to what could be a unit of Iraqis. There's just one tiny problem. The whole thing is under a housing estate. And we've got just 3 days to try and crack it. When the Victorian builders put up these terraces in South Shields, they found Roman tombstones, skeletons and cremations. The discoveries seemed to cluster in one area, but the records were rough and ready, so the location of this cemetery is fuzzy. Our task is to find the cemetery in a landscape that's changed even since the Victorian discoveries, and where there are precious few patches of ground where we can dig. Tim, what's our strategy going to be?
We know we've got this area of Roman graves down here for the cemetery, but there's not a large number of them. There's only 16. So our plan is that we're going to look for the extent of the cemetery.
You think there's going to be more graves than that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these are chance finds made from the Victorian period till fairly recently, and as far as I know, there's only been one modern excavation. Is that right, Paul?
Yes, that's right.
What did you find?
4 or 5 burials, probably 4th century inhumations. Right alongside them there were cremations in pots, and they probably dated 2nd, early 3rd century.
So how do we investigate this cemetery?
Well, my plan is that we don't start from the known, we actually go beyond the edges of the known cemetery.
Outside the cemetery?
Yeah.
We've got just 3 days, mate.
Well, that's true, but the key things we want to learn is how big it was and just how far it does extend. So the aim is to go for these open areas, the grassed areas on the plan, put a decent trench, and we'll start with one down here on the west of the cemetery and one just behind us on the north side of the cemetery. We've got locals who are going to dig in back gardens, and they're starting in the middle. So that should give us an arc trying to understand whether the burials go out that far.
It's a bit random, isn't it, Phil? A bit like chucking darts in a dartboard.
Not at all, Tony. What you've got to understand is we are a slap bank in the middle of a big housing estate. The green areas are the only places we can actually put trenches. So we've got to go for the green areas.
The green areas?
The green areas, these areas here.
The areas with the dog poo?
All in the day's work, Tony.
Rather you than me. Tim's strategy, starting trenches 1 and 2 right out here and working in, is the opposite of the traditional approach and may ruffle a few feathers. But he says our first goal is the extent, not the content of the cemetery. We'll see. Well, we will if we can actually reach the Roman levels. When the original Victorian terraces were knocked down, the new estate was just built on top of the rubble. We've got to get through it. Geophys have been using radar, their deepest surveying technique, so we can try to avoid excavating Victorian cellars.
Well, what we're seeing is mainly all the Victorian houses. We think there were 2 street lines here, one at the front and one at the back.
Running
parallel with the road, yeah. Mm-hmm. And we think in the middle of the trench we may be into the yard.
So that's houses, courtyard houses?
That's right.
Yeah.
But this is all disturbing our results. It's only when we go to the radar This is the disturbance, the Victorian rubble, but you can see these responses below. What we wonder is whether that's the archaeology, and that's what we want to see.
Could it just be the deep foundations of the houses?
It could be the deep foundations of the houses. And the only way we'll find out is by digging.
The Victorian builders are a tough act to follow. They found some amazing stuff, like this. Right in the middle of our site, they unearthed two of the finest Roman tombstones in Britain. One was put up by a Syrian for his 30-year-old wife, Regina, a freed slave from southern Britain. The other was in memory of Victor, a 20-year-old North African and former slave from his Spanish master. Roman South Shields was clearly a microcosm of the whole empire. Who were the people who would have manned this place?
Like most forts on the frontier, it's manned by provincials. These are people the Romans hired from all around the Roman world. They never based them in the provinces they came from. They took them off to do the dirty frontier long-term garrison work. And we know there were Gauls here. There were also Asturians, who were Spanish cavalry regiments. We also know that in the 4th century, there seemed to have been a unit of bargemen, probably from the Tigris area, which is roughly equivalent to modern Iraq.
Tigris bargemen? They must have been tired by the time they got here. But their services may have been useful here at the Roman fort of Arbeia, which commanded a strategic location next to the North Sea and overlooking the mouth of the River Tyne. The fort was 4 miles east of Hadrian's Wall, the northern limit of the Roman Empire, and acted as its supply base. The first known fort was built in AD 160, though there was probably an earlier one. The fort's gatehouse has been reconstructed from the plan revealed by excavations. There's also a reconstruction of the luxurious quarters lived in by the commander of these improbable-sounding Tigris bargemen. A very impressive place, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what's this room?
This is the summer dining room of the commanding officer. As you can see, it's a very magnificent room, very high ceiling, frescoes. So here you've got the commander on the northern frontier living very much in the style of a Mediterranean gentleman.
Commanding Tigris boatmen?
Oh, it's a really exotic thought, isn't it? But that comes from a late Roman military document called the Notitia Dignitatum that lists all the units of the Roman army, and here at South Shields, Arbeia, it lists this unit of Tigris boatmen.
I love the idea that 2,000 years ago the Iraqis were part of an invading force in this country. Of course, it would be fantastic to find artefacts that could confirm the presence of these Tigris boatmen, but first we have to find burials of any kind. And to widen our search for the cemetery, we're planning to dig test pits in local residents' gardens.
The 2 big trenches we were talking about.
It's just an arbitrary gamble of which house we go for.
Doesn't sound as if they're on there.
Hi, we're from the Time team, and we were wondering if we might put a trench into your garden?
No.
Oh.
Because it's all paving stone, they
Yeah.
need, like, digging it all up.
That's going to be a bit problem there.
What?
We've got a big extension that's completely paved over.
Is it?
Oh.
Yes. But you quite want to dig the front garden.
We could probably get a hole down there.
Yeah.
Small one.
This test pit will be here in the middle of the estate. Others will be in an arc running up to Trench 2, which is being dug to look for the northern boundary of the cemetery. But the first indications aren't hopeful. Phil's come down onto concrete where we might have expected the demolition rubble of Victorian houses. And Bridget's bogged down in modern services, gas, water and electricity pipes. Children at the local Hadrian Junior School are also going to be digging test pits. John Gator is looking for targets for them. Because the school's right next to the fort, it's likely that they might find traces of the vicus, or civilian settlement, that surrounded all Roman garrisons. You know how in the cowboy films you've got the fort and then outside it you've got all these old shacks full of Indians and whores and drunken doctors? Do you reckon that's what it would have been like outside a Roman fort?
Yeah, pretty much. The Roman army on campaign, pushing forward the frontier, has a whole baggage train of prostitutes and wives and children and their booty, and a series of huts and shacks would grow up around every kind of fort.
But actually here on Hadrian's Wall it seems to have been different. The forts are a lot more permanent, and as soon as the forts become permanent, the towns become much more permanent, much more organised. If you were standing here outside South Shields in the 2nd century, you'd see a paved street of the vicus with stone-built houses, shop fronts opening onto the street where the soldiers could buy everything they might want, workshops behind. Some of the soldiers who were married would have houses, and there'd be inns for travellers, and even beyond that you'd then have temples, you'd have a religious area, and beyond that a cemetery. So it's a whole thriving community, but really quite established, well-ordered and well-run.
The population of the vicus and the fort might have been more than 1,000. During the 300-odd years of the fort's life, thousands of people would have died in Arbeia. They must have been buried somewhere. Stuart's trying to work out whether the shape of the landscape in Roman times offers any clues as to where the cemetery might have been. Bridget in Trench 1 has found a way through the services.
Have you found any Roman features?
Well, no, not yet. We just seem to be going through this Victorian makeup layer debris. But then Ray's been up here and he has found 3 bits of medieval pots. We've got the green glaze.
Oh, yeah, that's good, isn't it? Amazing.
So Bridget's got another 1,400 years to go if she's going to find the western boundary of the cemetery. Phil, though, in Trench 2, can't get any deeper. 12 years of time, team, tells me that this isn't Roman, Phil.
No, I don't think I've ever found a vehicle inspection pit before, Tony. I'm blaming him. You know, when we put this trench in, I was expecting the foundations of a Victorian terrace.
Well, there's a certain law that covers this. Where the trench actually went, found out looking at an aerial photograph of 1949, was in that gap there between the houses. The one and only gap in the entire area of Victorian houses. I think it must have been a stray bomb or something. It's left this gap and then they've put this concrete, whatever it is, in here to fill the gap.
If you think that this trench is useless, come and have a look at this one here. Look at this. It's a sand pit, isn't it, Phil?
Tony, that is very, very informative. Look, do you see those horizontal lines along there, actually in the sand? That tells us that it is natural sand. Now, that means that we're not going to actually find any Romans in there. We've actually dug down a long way, and it is natural sand.
Phil, we can knock Trench 2 on the head, can't we?
I think we can.
This doesn't feel too promising, but it's only day 1, and it may be that Tim's strategy of discounting areas quickly is paying off. At the school, the children have only got down to Victorian levels.
Do you think that could be? This
I'll try and square it
And
up.
the residents' test pits have got a way to go too.
You've done a long way down.
Yes. Most of it's what we've dug through is just all the demolition of the 1960s and when they pulled all the Victorian terraces down.
So you reckon that's a Victorian wall at the bottom?
Definitely. Yeah, it's old style handmade bricks, and that we've pulled a load of them out and all that.
Well, you're not down onto natural yet, so there might be Roman archaeology down below that. You're getting very short on working space in the bottom there. You must be having a nightmare.
This is the major link between northern Britain and the rest of the Roman Empire, effectively.
Stuart's now come up with new information about the cemetery and its location and extent.
Wet areas, the Roman road.
So where's our cemetery?
The cemeteries here in the open areas we've marked, we know that the cemeteries are placed alongside roads, and this is the major road out from the fort here. And you can see how the slope drops off down there. The cemetery was placed on that crest quite deliberately so that the Roman tombs would be visible from people coming up the road there or leaving the settlement. The choice of that is quite deliberate.
This is big, or rather small, because if the cemetery were located on this spur, it must be much smaller than we imagined. which might explain why both trenches 1 and 2 and many of our test pits are empty. But 400 years of fort would have generated lots of dead people who must be buried somewhere. Even though Trench 2 didn't find anything Roman, it's the closest we've dug to the known burials. And Phil thinks it's worth moving a few yards closer.
We haven't finished with this area down here. All we've done is establish where the level of the sand is, and we've seen it in about, what, an area of 2 by 2. I mean, you could have a grave all the way around that and you wouldn't find it. So what we need to do is open a big area. And we got the space down here, we can open up quite a big area.
I don't agree, actually, Phil, because if you look at this map, what you'll see is a roadway found just behind those houses over there. And I think there might be a roadway leading down this ridge, and we know that you get Roman burials next to roadways.
Hang on a minute. What we said was that we wanted to find the extent of the cemetery.
Yeah.
If we go with Stuart's theory, Roman road down there, we know already that there have been finds down there. So aren't we undermining what you wanted to do?
Yes, we are, to some extent. But I think there's some value in both of their ideas.
You're sitting on a fence, aren't you, eh?
Are we going to get our Roman finds down Stuart's Roman Road or in Phil's sandpit? We'll find out tomorrow. We're looking to see how far a Roman cemetery extends under this housing estate in South Shields. So far, we've found medieval plough soil in our first trench and a 20th century vehicle inspection pit in our second. But we haven't written off this area, and we're opening Trench 3 nearby to look for the northern limit of the cemetery. Trench 4 is also underway, a little closer to the known burials. It'll look for graves placed near Stuart's possible Roman road. If these trenches don't deliver, the plan is to keep moving towards the known burials. I can't remember the last time that we did a time team when at the end of day 1 we'd found so little, in fact, absolutely nothing. I'm starting to get this dread feeling that at the end of day 3 I'll have to turn to camera and say we came here looking for a Roman cemetery but found something much more interesting, 50 tonnes of sand and a vehicle inspection pit. Having said that though, yesterday this whole area was full of rather unfocused frenzy as people were digging everywhere, and now at least it looks like they're starting to think and pontificate. We actually got something, Brish.
Well, yeah, we have. It's the first feature in this trench. It's this irregular shaped cut here. It's cutting through this windswept redeposited sand, and inside it we've got bands, distinct bands of clay and then dirty sand and then clay and then dirty sand again.
Do you reckon that's something created by humans?
It looks like it to me. If you look at that nice vertical edge there, the sharpness of the cut, it looks like an intrusion that's been deliberately dug. This could be a Roman feature.
Roman grave?
I'm not really sure. It has the feel to me in a sort of sand subsoil like this, perhaps a natural feature. You know, with heavy rain leading to hollows forming, clay in the bottom of the hollows as it dries out, windblown sand, more clay.
So what are we going to do with it?
Well, I think we need to get to the bottom of it. One of the problems is, though, what we'll find, because in sand...
Well, exactly. But I don't think we're going to find much evidence of any bone left within the sand because it just disappears pretty quickly.
Does that mean that we can't prove whether it's a grave or not?
Oh, no, because in a Roman grave, especially in a military cemetery, you would expect to get grave goods. So even with no preservation of bone, it is possible to prove a Roman grave.
Well, it may turn out just to be a pond, but it is the most positive thing we've got yet.
It is.
There you go, Phil.
In Trench 4, there's already a strong sniff of Roman in the finds.
It's quite a nice bold rim, really.
Yeah, it's been knocked around it, hasn't it?
But that's the last piece of archaeology Matt Williams will see for 24 hours. For 250 years, this fort would have been manned by Roman auxiliaries, tough troopers from all over the empire. They'd have signed up for 25 hard years. Matt's going to see if he could have hacked it.
Where'd you come from?
London.
I'm afraid rural recruits are considered better, and they're better used to the hardship.
I'm a soft city boy, then.
I can tell. Gaius,
Matt's going to live an uncomfortable 24 hours as a 4th century trooper, with tough training, draconian discipline and foul food. Not to mention having to go commando.
You'll get used to it. I hope so. Right, jump up and down.
There are certain things we're looking for in a Roman medical. An alert face, we need a straight neck, a broad chest, broad shoulders. These might come with age. We're looking for a tight stomach. We don't want anybody running to fat, muscular buttocks, calf muscles and feet. The sacramentum.
I swear by God, Christ and the Holy Spirit.
I swear by God, Christ and the Holy Spirit.
And by the majesty
In pursuit of the mortal remains of the Roman troops who were here 1600 years ago, Trench 4's looking for burials near Stuart's Roman Road. But the finds aren't what we expected. Instead of evidence of dead people, we're getting traces of occupation where people lived.
Oh, well, it's obvious that's Gaulish Samian ware, imported from Roman Gaul. And I can tell straight away this is a very rare form. You know those mortaria, those Roman kitchen mixing bowls?
With the grits inside.
That's right, for grinding up the food. Very characteristic of Roman cooking. This is a very rare Samian form of mortarium. It's got a kind of vertical wall around the edge here with a very characteristic little lion's head spout on one side, and then the bowl down here with the grits. You can actually see some of the grit there. It's not the sort of thing I'd expect to find in a grave, though. I think that's occupational debris.
I mean, I've been talking to Tim about it, and we agree it definitely looks like some sort of occupation deposit.
It does. I mean, it's a thick deposit, a whole range of material in it, and there's even got coal in it.
Well, you see, they've always really placed the vicus up further towards the fort, haven't they, on the west side of it? That looks like we've now found evidence for it stretching further down here.
Down here as well, yeah.
With the vicus appearing to stretch further south than previously thought, the Roman map of South Shields is being redrawn. That's all very well, but where are the burials? Carenza's approaching the problem from a different angle. She's also going over exactly what archaeologists here at South Shields have found in test pits previously dug around the estate.
The cemeteries seem to occupy quite different sizes.
Exai!
Matt's getting a crash course in Roman drilling.
Mue! Scutum telite! Ah! State! Transformer!
Romans are here for about 360 years, and it takes them 40 or 50 years to get up to this part of Britain. They virtually give up their attempts to conquer Scotland, and then that's it, more or less, for the next 2.5 to 3 centuries. Just a whole load of permanent forts here. It's the edge of the Roman world. It's just the garrison at the end of the known world, if you like.
Would any of the soldiers actually have been British?
Oh, no. The one great thing about the Romans with their armies, they realised if you hired local troops and based them locally, you could have actually been hiring your own resistance and equipping them. So normally, you'd take units from the provinces that you controlled and you'd put them in other parts of the army where you could control them. These are really tough men who are used to very considerable hardship, all sorts of discipline, and the Roman army came down like an absolute ton of bricks on any mutinous troops who decided they'd had enough of this.
Down.
What happened when they were too old to fight?
The provincial auxiliaries served for 25 years and then they got their reward. They became Roman citizens and then they had a status in life which would be passed on to their children. I think quite a lot of them would have been inclined to stay in the vicus around here.
So in these houses there may well be people who are descended from Roman soldiers?
Oh, around here in South Shields?
Yeah.
I'm absolutely sure of that, yeah.
If they are, that's as close to Romans as our residents have got. Their test pits are all still empty. At least the children in the local junior school near the fort have got some archaeology in theirs.
Do you think you've actually into Roman layers here?
No.
No, why not?
We haven't really found anything. We found some slate.
Oh, and that pottery is quite modern, isn't it? This is probably Victorian as well. We need to try and get below all of that and just see if we've got Roman even further down, because that would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Phil, I can't believe this. You only had a couple of pieces before lunch.
In Trench 4, Phil's flow of finds has turned into a flood. But the story is still settlement, not cemetery.
I mean, look at this. We got this loads of same in us. That's probably my favourite. It's nicely decorated.
Actually, it's not that wonderful, you know. If you look at the rosettes, they're very worn down, and it's got that rather smudgy orange colour. I think this is East Gaulish, you know, late 2nd century, early 3rd century. It's come across from the Rhineland.
Well, they're notable for their crappy Samian.
Well, actually, they weren't very good at it, and it's not that. It's quite distinctive, actually, but it's a good date, though.
And then we've also got these colour-coated, which I love that sort of decoration.
Yeah, that's one of those little beer drinking beakers.
Beer drinking?
That's right.
I approve of that, yeah.
But this one, I think, has come from the Nene Valley, Cambridgeshire, near Peterborough,
right.
that sort of area.
And then we've got more roulette in as well.
Oh, yeah, yes, yeah. That colour makes me think this is from North Gaul.
Yeah?
So quite, yeah. You know, what's really interesting about that is it sort of shows all the trade routes that have gone up here. I mean, we know the place was a port, don't we? So a lot of this stuff would have been shipped in up the East Coast or across the North Sea.
Among the finds turned up by Victorian builders were a number of skulls, all of which show signs of trauma. That's wounds to you and me. Even a supply base like Arbeia would have seen its share of frontline action, and the actual wounds have been intriguing our bones experts.
We've got these skulls, and a lot of them have got cut marks on like these. You can see caused by a very sharp blade, and another one there, and another one there. These are obviously inflicted when this poor bloke was down on his knees, probably, by somebody who was in a bit of a frenzy of killing. And there's a lot of evidence of that. But this one's probably the most unusual one of all, because you've got this depressed fracture where the bone is still attached on the inside, and you've got the signature of the weapon that actually caused that here. So we're experimenting to see if we can actually establish what type of weapon caused that signature.
It's not clear whether the wounds were inflicted on Romans or by Romans.
You can see what it's done. You can see that it's crushed the bone there, and then there's a fracture leading up here. So we are starting to get these radiating fractures coming out, but it still doesn't look like that, does it, Margaret?
It doesn't, no. My money's on this, Tony. I think the only thing that's the right sort of size with enough velocity to cause this sort of damage is something like shot or a stone even that would have actually impacted like that.
Slingshots were used by both local Britons and the Romans. That does look pretty plausible.
It does, it's quite convincing, I think.
Close. In Trench 3, put in to look for the northern limit of the cemetery, Bridget had produced our first possible sniff of a burial, the feature which might have been a grave cut. Damn.
Yes, I'm afraid so.
It's not a grave cut, is it?
No, it isn't, but then I was right. I said it was a natural feature, didn't I?
Yeah, but this is the third trench with nothing in it, isn't it?
Well, I'm not as dispirited as all that. We've looked at a reasonable area. It's clearly nothing here. So now we follow our strategy. We move on and in.
But realistically, we're 2/3 of the way through day 2. When we hadn't found anything at all at the end of yesterday, I thought, oh, well, it's kind of frustrating, but time is ticking, isn't it?
Well, it is, and if we don't find something soon, I'm going to start getting worried.
Yeah.
But at the moment, we're following a strategy.
Where are we heading?
Well, we're heading to the next trench, which is closer to the previously discovered cemetery. By the time we get to this trench, we're only, 30 metres from where the cremations were found before.
John, you've done the geophys?
Yeah, we're still having problems trying to see through all this Victorian rubble. I mean, you can see it in the radar here, the red and yellow. It's when we're going deeper into the ground that things are needing investigation. This is what we've looked at here. OK, it turned out to be a coil of metal wire.
Great.
But it's the only way we can evaluate things. You know, we've got some superb targets, I think, on the other side of the digger, over there, and I'd like to look at those.
So this trench will now be extended, and every metre we go means a metre closer to the known burials.
Put your shoulders into it.
What's the Latin for a wuss? That, I have to say, he was hitting you much harder than you were hitting him.
Yeah, well, you know, he's got a bit of a He's got a bit of advantage on me, I think. I'm not quite used to this.
Are you a little bit girly with your whacking, weren't you?
Well, I'm not used to wielding such massive tools, to be honest. And they weigh an absolute ton. I mean, this, although it's made of wood, it's not very well balanced and it's quite hard to swing around. You've got to keep.
That's why you weren't hitting him harder, isn't it? Yeah. Gosh, yeah. You need muscles there and there and in there.
And then this shield again. You've got to keep it upright the whole time, and also move it around quite quickly so to parry his blows.
Yeah.
Because you can't use that obviously. And then of course there's the trusty chainmail which weighs an absolute ton, so you're getting dragged down the whole time.
And was he hurting you when he whacked you?
Oh no, not at all really. It's fine.
That's better, Matt. At last, one of our test pits is delivering Roman finds. The question is, could they be from burials?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yes. Right, that's from a nice little piece of flagon. There's the main body, and then that's up to the rim. Unfortunately, without the handle or the proper rim, it's going to be very hard to date that, but that's guaranteed Roman period. Now, a flagon is the sort of thing you could get in a cremation burial as a grave good, but it's more likely that this is just a normal flagon from everyday use, part of everyday life in the vicus, really.
So just possibly a grave good. But we still have nothing that positively shows a cemetery. Trench 4 is becoming our hot trench. Not the roadside burials that Stuart expected, but instead signs of settlement in the form of a midden or rubbish dump. And now it's thrown up another surprise.
Nick, would you care to have a look at this? Incredibly compact, hard surface.
Wow, that is hard, isn't it? That's real metalling.
I mean, is this the sort of surface that you get from your Roman roads up here?
Yes, it looks Roman to me, given the amount of Roman material we've had off the top of it.
Oh, it's there. It's there. It's there. There it is. Oh, God, it's still going.
A Roman road, another sign of life where we expected to find death. It's becoming a real puzzle trying to work out what happened to all those people who must have died at Arbeia. Were they all in one cemetery? Carenza's trying to find out whether the layout of other Roman fort sites can tell us why the cemetery here is so elusive. The answer may be both simple and devastating.
The problem is that the cemetery may well be a lot smaller and a lot more compact, and perhaps several cemeteries. What we may be hitting is the gaps in between. I think what we really need to do from the archaeological point of view is start as close as possible to any spot where we know we've had human remains in the ground.
But that's the exact opposite of what Tim told us the strategy was at the beginning. He said start wide out and work in.
And it hasn't worked.
Okay.
Well, I think we should start working in from the known and work out.
Is there anywhere that we know of where there are remains in situ?
Point H on the map here, where there was a small rescue excavation which did encounter Roman cremations and burials.
So Carenza's faction wants to dig here, Point H. It'll be very interesting to see what Tim thinks about that. We won't have to wait long for Tim's reaction. The day's drawing to a close. And at the end of Matt's day, there's one last ordeal for him in the Legionaries' taverna. Seaweed beer. Still, gambling, ale, debauchery. Little change there from a digger's normal life.
No. I just tip them all into my face.
And now, time for Tim and Carenza's showdown at the Point H Corral.
This is where we've ended up. This is the last piece of green we have. This is what we've got to investigate.
But this is the one area I think we should be looking at as well, because under those bungalows is the one area where we found in situ skeletal human remains recently.
Carenza, is this the mysterious H?
That is H on the map that we talked about earlier. And we've actually got the end of a grave cut just here. So there's a really definite target to go for.
That's brilliant. If we have a grave here, we can actually put a trench on top of it and work out from it. In other words, we're going to turn our strategy on its head and work from the known to the unknown.
John, do we have any evidence from the geophys that there's anything here?
We've only managed to do half of that strip so far. as we go into the ground with the radar, we're starting to get this really clear response. It seems to have a curving edge. I think that may be significant, and we ought to look at that.
That would be really interesting, because there's other test pits have been dug down there, one of which found what looked like the edge of a curving ditch, which either that or your thing, or both of them, may be part of a Roman barrow burial, which you do find associated with these military forts. So they could be part of the cemetery as well.
Suddenly everyone's talking the talk. There's loads of evidence to dig here.
Well, I think there's some interesting ideas here, but we need to do some more work. We need more geophys, I think, before we can be certain about what's down there. And this curving barrow, we need to work out really how big it is, what it is, before we can know where to dig. I think in the meanwhile, while that's going on, let's get on with the search on this one.
But all that is for tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Are we going to find the cemetery? Are we going to find the mysterious missing bodies? This grass is our last chance saloon. Beginning of day 3 in our quest for a Roman cemetery here in South Shields, and we've searched everywhere we can on this entire estate, and we've certainly found evidence of Roman occupation over on that grass where that big mound of earth is, but not one single burial. We don't understand it, but we've got one final throw of the dice left over there on that green by that yellow digger. Let's hope we find something. 2 new trenches are planned. The first close to an earlier excavation which found part of a Roman burial. 20 metres away, geophys are surveying our second target. A previous test pit here found part of a curving ditch which could have ringed a Roman barrow burial. We want to find out if it did. The only problem is we know that the area is packed with gas, water and electricity service pipes. At the same time, our surveyor Henry is trying to work out how big the possible barrow would be, scaling up from the small segment of ditch that was found.
Transformer!
Matt, our trainee legionary, is looking sick as a Roman cur this morning. It can't just have been the seaweed beer. Legionaries had a short, tough life. They spent half their time drunk, the other half drilling exhaustively. Or in Matt's case, stuck in a ditch, just like a digger. You swore you'd serve the Emperor till death, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
Well, you're pretty close to it by the look of you.
I'm pretty close to swearing, that's true. It was absolutely freezing last night. I was falling asleep on my feet out there. I've been posted outside the barracks. I've been told it's 2 o'clock in the morning. A bit knackered now. I'm sure I'll be a lot tighter in a couple of hours' time. I'm on this till 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't think I'll get more than a couple of hours' sleep before we have to get up and start cleaning things up. Then we've got a roll call after that.
Germanicus!
Add some.
And the captain pinched your fags?
He pinched my fags and crushed them underfoot, claiming that they weren't Roman. At which point I was ready to rebel there.
Imagine if you were an Italian and you were posted over here to South Shields.
I think I'll be running straight back to Italy as quickly as possible.
Matt's time is done, and so is he. It's now nearly lunchtime. Talk about last orders at the Last Chance Saloon. Anything in here?
Well, there would have been, but unfortunately, we've got Service City here. I mean, old Victorian services, some of which we couldn't have picked up.
Damn.
So
and nothing else?
Nothing else, I'm afraid, no.
What about over here?
Well, down here, where we had highest hopes of finding a burial, more services.
So what are we going to do?
We've got one chance, I think. This is the geophysics we've now extended. They're the trenches. Look at that, that stands out like a sore thumb. We can't ignore that. It might only be more Victorian cellars, but given the circumstances, we've got to go for it.
Perhaps it is one option and it's just down here, but I haven't given up over here.
We've still got lots of services, though.
Well, there are services, but there's a gap. Just up here, right on the edge of the site.
What, from the edge of this pavement down to this orange line? Tim, that is an act of desperation.
Absolutely not. We've got this trench we're going to put in here, and we're going to go down there.
Where the pegs are, we've marked it out.
Well, we'll have dug up the whole estate then, won't we?
Pretty much, but that's the way it goes.
Flipping heck. So 2 new trenches are going in. One to investigate John's anomaly, and the other as close to point H as we can get. But it feels like desperation. We're no longer looking for a cemetery, we're looking for a single grave. And our best bet may still be the possible barrow burial in Trench 7, even though it's been damaged by services. Tim, I remember the night before we started, there you were, first time that you'd run a time team dig. And what you were worried about was how we were going to process this wealth of archaeology which was going to gush up out of the earth as soon as you put a trench in.
Yep, and it's been rather different, hasn't it?
Why?
I think it's because the land surface we see now is very different from the Roman underlying surface, and we didn't realise how variable the geology was. You know, sand this deep in one place, clay in natural hollows, gullies and things that we didn't imagine were going to be there at all.
But this is quite interesting, isn't it?
Well, it is, because in fact the archaeology in here, although it's not cemetery, I think is beginning to make me feel we can tie it all together.
In what way?
Well, underneath that midden, you know, the rubbish deposit that Phil found yesterday, we discovered a cobbled path, which I think Phil's glorified with the name of a road. It's not what you'd call Grade 1 standard major Roman roads, but it's still a path, and it's on this particular alignment leading down towards the known burials. And that makes me excited, because I think we're getting the idea of a path leading towards the burials.
Why do you say you're beginning to be able to tie everything together?
Well, because we found these same cobbles in the next trench down, even closer to the cemetery.
Bridget's Trench?
Absolutely, yeah.
So this pathway thing is heading through that trench and on to Carenza's glorious Point H?
Absolutely, that's what we think, yeah. And what's more, we've discovered something new in the last half an hour, which I think makes that idea even more positive.
Tell me.
Well, you can see the road, or rather what's left of it, down here. But we've just discovered a ditch on the same alignment towards the far side, running through the yellow sand, that grey band. The previous excavation that did find burials was defined by ditches on exactly this alignment. And I think we found the edge of their cemetery plot.
Which is what we came to look for, wasn't it? The definition of the cemetery.
Absolutely.
But it would be nice to find a burial, wouldn't it?
There's just a chance that we may have found something.
What?
Well, over in the section of the trench there, Bridge, I think, thinks she may have found something cut in the ditch that looks a bit like a burial.
Do you think you might actually have a grave cut?
Yeah, well, I certainly hope so. Look, you can see it. Clay inside, quite a square-looking feature. And on this site, there has been Roman graves found cut into gullies before.
Well, that's the most optimistic thing I've heard for several hours. A grave would be fantastic news. And there's more good news from the children of the local junior school, who've produced an impressive haul of finds from their test pits.
They've actually found a lot of Roman pottery, considering what a small area has been opened up.
They've done very well indeed, they really have.
Can you give them an idea of what was going on in the Roman period on this spot from what they found?
Well, I can see straight away there's a really nice little collection of Roman kitchenware. This is the kind of material that was used every day in a Roman kitchen. It would pick up contaminants from the food, and they'd throw it away on a fairly regular basis, much as we would throw away paper plates, polystyrene containers, that sort of thing. This is the kind of material that would have been used in the houses in the vicus, where the families of the soldiers who lived in the fort were having their ordinary everyday lives.
But where were the beggars buried? Not here. John's anomaly has turned out to be a dump of bricks. Possibly here, next to Point H. But because of the services, we'll never know.
Is it another one of those services?
There's a big void in here, look.
Even more disappointingly, Bridget's possible grave cut has turned out to be a natural feature, though the trench has produced a fine Samian sherd.
It's a really nice piece, got a stag there, all these decorative features, mass-produced by one of the huge factories in central Gaul, central France, shipped into Britain by the ton.
Sort of what date are we talking?
Round about the middle of the 2nd century, so about the time that the stone fort was built.
Phil's been called away from his barrow hunt to Trench 4, which has produced yet another surprise.
When I left, all we had was this Roman road surface. Now you've got this whacking great slot cut through it. What archaeology have you found in it?
We found that underneath the road surface we have this great massive dump of clay, about a foot deep.
That's this stuff here?
That's been put there to build the road. Underneath that clay we've got the natural sand, so we're really out at the bottom there. And cut through that, at this end of the trench, we've got this small pit full of grey soil and charcoal.
Is there any cremated bone coming out of that?
We can't see any yet with the naked eye. We have got one big bit of bone, which is in that tray there.
Where did this come from?
It's from a level which is much nearer the level of the road surface, just about this sort of height in the section.
Oh, that black stuff, or...?
No, just below that. Just
oh, right,
below that.
OK.
Well, is it human?
I think it probably is.
Which bit of the body?
It looks like a chunk of upper arm from quite a chunky arm as well.
But to be sure...
The possible cremation pit turned out to be a prehistoric feature, but the human bone shows there was a burial nearby. 20 metres away, Bridget's Trench has also finally produced intriguing evidence that we are close to the cemetery. Ditches on the right alignment, and now, what could be even more positive, bone.
The question is, what sort of bone? It's in such awful condition. It's certainly not cremated bone. I mean, it's mostly from long bones, but my goodness, it's the consistency of toothpaste.
Yeah, it's just rotten, it's falling apart.
This is obviously why we're not recovering any skeletons here, isn't it? This soil's so acidic that bone's just decaying. There is nothing there that's recognisable as anything that's either specifically animal or specifically human.
Whether or not it's human, we now know that we're close to the cemetery, or one of them. It was small and couldn't have held all of Arbeia's dead, so there must have been other cemeteries. This one was prominently placed crowning a hill with access along Phil's track. We now also know that the vicus stretched further down than previously thought, forming the northern boundary. The main road south from the fort was the eastern limit. To the south, there was marshy ground unsuitable for burials. And what of Phil, who's been digging right in the middle of this wedge-shaped cemetery? His persistence in Trench 7 has paid off. It's not a barrow, but he's snatched victory from the jaws of the utilities.
It's a lovely little feature. You can see that it's cut into this very orangey clay, and it's filled up with this grey-brown clay, which is exactly the same material as the subsoil, the sort of Roman subsoil. So I'm pretty confident that it is Roman in date. And I say, it's so nicely cut with a nice flat base to it, I wonder whether it didn't perhaps have some sort of timber wall inside it.
It's peculiar that, because one just like it was excavated at right angles in the test pit that was dug a few years ago next door. So we seem to have two at right angles here, and that starts to suggest an enclosure.
Which might be the sort of feature that you actually get in a cemetery.
Well, certainly with that clay like that, I mean, almost a deliberate infill like that, that's the sort of thing you get in ritual enclosures, you know, around cremations and other burials. So I think we're where we should be.
An enclosure would probably have surrounded a family plot containing cremations marked with stones or stakes. It would be 3rd century or earlier, before the Roman Empire converted to Christianity and burial became the preferred funeral practice. Well, one thing we can say about this estate is it's pretty well stocked with gas, water and electricity pipes, most of which we found in our trenches. But with the help of South Shields residents and school kids, we've managed to unpick the story of a Roman cemetery from this maze of buildings and concrete. And I think that's a bit of a result.